Picture this. You're finally in that corner office you've dreamed about, managing your own team. Everything's going great until you notice one of your star employees starting to slip. Their work quality is dropping, they're coming in late, and their enthusiasm has vanished. What do you do? Hi there, I'm Dr. Emily Block, and today we're diving into something that keeps many new managers up at night, managing performance. Trust me, this isn't just about filling out boring evaluation forms once a year. It's about keeping your team motivated so that they can perform consistently at their highest levels. Here's a question for you. When you hear about someone underperforming, should you just wait for the annual review to address it? Of course not. And that brings us to an important distinction that we need to understand, the difference between performance management and performance appraisal. Let me break this down with something you're all familiar with, your university experience. Think about performance appraisal as your final exam. It's that formal moment where you're evaluated on how well you've mastered the material. You get the grade, and that grade reflects your past performance in the class. Pretty straightforward. Performance management, on the other hand, that's everything else that happens during the semester. It's your professor giving you feedback on assignments, offering office hours for extra help, providing study guides, making sure you have all the resources you need to succeed. Where performance appraisal is taking a snapshot of where you are, performance management is about helping you grow. Corporations are often like a student who only crams for the exam the night before. They're great at those annual performance reviews, but what about all the important stuff that happens in between? So let's talk about what it really means to manage performance strategically using a sports analogy. Imagine you're building a championship sports team. You wouldn't just show up at the end of the season and tell players if they made the cut or not. No, you need a bunch of things. First, a game plan. What does good look like? Just like a coach needs a clear set of standards for what makes a good player, managers need clear performance standards. You need a scoring system. How do we measure success? It's not just about wins or losses. It's about understanding all the metrics that matter. How do we rate different aspects of performance fairly and consistently? There's the post-game talk. Have you ever watched those sideline conversations between coaches and players? That's like giving employee feedback. It needs to be clear, timely, and actionable. But unlike those heated sideline moments, we need to be a bit more strategic about how we communicate. You need team buy-in. The best coaches don't just dictate standards. They work with their teams to set goals that everyone understands and believes in. So we have to figure out, how do we develop standards that both managers and employees see as fair and achievable? Remember, if you're waiting for the annual review to manage performance, it's like trying to win a championship by only showing up for the final game. Performance management is about coaching your team through every practice, every game, every season. One of the big challenges of doing performance management is that it's really hard to build systems that measure all the aspects of performance. Think about the way that I get evaluated for teaching. Students fill out an end of semester evaluation, giving me scores on a scale of 1 to 5, and maybe if I'm lucky, they'll leave some comments. There are a couple problems with this type of teaching evaluation. First, it only measures a really small part of my job. It catches my in-role expectations, the basic job requirements, like how well do the materials reflect the content? But they're missing all the extra role performance, those above and beyond moments that really make a difference in your learning experience, like helping in ethical behaviors that embody the culture and values of the university, things that are instrumental in making the whole school function. And here's the kicker. By the time you fill out that evaluation, the semester's over. How does that help me improve teaching for that class? It may help for next class, but it doesn't really help you. Performance management is so tricky because it has these multiple purposes: administrative, developmental, and strategic. The administrative purpose is judging people's past performance in order to allocate rewards, figuring out how to get people paid, how to give out bonuses and raises, and maybe even figure out who to keep employing and who to fire. Those are the teaching evaluations. Then there's the developmental purpose, which predicts future performance, and it's all about spotting and developing talent. It helps figure out, who do we fast track for leadership positions, and how do we turn good performers into great ones. And then finally, there's the strategic purpose, which focuses on current performance. How are we doing relative to our organizational goals? What are our current metrics compared to where we think we should be? But even though performance management requires doing all these three things, it's impossible to do them all at the same time. This is why you need to separate those roles into time and space. Picture yourself in a coaching session with your boss. They're helping you improve your presentation skills, and you're feeling really vulnerable, sharing your insecurities about public speaking. Then suddenly the same person switches hats and starts evaluating you for your annual bonus. You'd never trust them again. You'd never want to be vulnerable if that happened. And that's why smart organizations keep these roles separate. Weekly coaching and development, quarterly reviews for strategic alignment, and annual reviews for those big administrative decisions. Remember, just like you wouldn't want your defense attorney to also be your judge, why would you ever want your performance coach to also be your performance judge? A good rule to follow is that nobody should be ever surprised by what they're told on their annual evaluation. Now let's talk about how to build a fair performance appraisal system. Think of it like creating a perfect recipe. You need 3 ingredients to make it work. First up, reliability. Imagine ordering the same coffee at your local coffee shop 2 days in a row. If it's made perfectly both times, that's reliability. In performance terms, if an employee does the exact same quality work, they should get the exact same rating, no matter who's doing the rating or what kind of mood they're in. The next is validity, which means that something is measuring what it sets out to measure. Validity has 2 enemies. One is contamination. That's when stuff that has nothing to do with work sneaks into the evaluation, like rating someone lower on their performance evaluation because they're a loud chewer or wears too much cologne to work. The second is deficiency. That's when we miss important parts of someone's performance. Finally, specificity. Nobody likes vague directions like, hey, head that way. Similarly, telling employees to just do better isn't helpful. Specificity is about being as clear as a GPS. Turn right at the next intersection, then proceed 0.5 miles. For example, instead of saying, improve your customer service, you might say, respond to all customer emails within 4 hours, or use the customer's name at least twice during each interaction, or follow up within 24 hours after resolving a case. Now, let's talk about how our brains can play tricks on us when rating performance. Think of these as the 7 deadly sins of performance rating. Even with the best intentions, our human nature can sabotage our ability to rate fairly. First is leniency error, which is what happens when you want to be the nice guy. Like meet manager Mike, he gives everyone 5 out of 5 because everybody tried their best. This makes him popular at the office and the holiday party. But it's like giving every student an A+ just for showing up. How does anybody know what they need to do to improve? On the flip side, we have the severity error. Imagine manager Martha, who thinks that if you're not bleeding from your eyeballs, you're not working hard enough. She's making poor Josh at McDonald's feels like he's failing at life for not flipping burgers with Olympic-level precision. Not helpful. In the middle, we have the central tendency error. This is like the friend who, when asked to rate a movie, always says, meh, it was like 3 out of 5 for everything. From The Godfather to Sharknado, everything gets a middle rating. Organizations sometimes fix this by forcing managers to spread their ratings across the scale. Because if everyone's average, why even bother rating? The halo error is when you extrapolate from one feature. You know that charismatic coworker who could convince anybody that the sky is green? That's a halo effect in action. Oh, Jim's so funny at meetings, he must be amazing at spreadsheets too. But spoiler alert, being the office comedian doesn't automatically make you good at Excel. The recency error is about timing. We focus on recent things, like remembering the last episode of a TV series when rating the whole season. Just because Karen brought donuts to the office yesterday doesn't erase the 3 months she spent playing Candy Crush instead of working. Contrast error happens when you rely too much on comparisons. Imagine grading papers. After reading 5 F-worthy essays, a C- starts looking like Shakespeare. Managers need to space out their evaluations to avoid this, well, at least they're better than Bob mentality. Finally, we have the similar to me error, which is exactly as it sounds. We like ourselves, so we like people who remind us of ourselves. Oh my God, you like pineapple pizza too? Here's your promotion. Also, pineapple pizza is gross. But We naturally evaluate people more positively when they remind us of ourselves. But just because Sarah also binge watches true crime documentaries doesn't mean that she's better at her job. To fight these biases, smart organizations create performance management systems that are robust and avoid some of these errors. They use standardized rating scales. They train managers to recognize their biases. They space out evaluations and use multiple raters and try and find ways to link performance evaluations to appropriate concrete data. Remember, being aware of these biases is half the battle. The other half is actively working to overcome them, because fair performance ratings, just like good reality TV, is hard to achieve but worth the effort. One way to decrease these problems is to use better scales. When you're asked to rate your professor on a scale of 1 to 5, those are called graphic rating scales. They assess performance along one or more continuous criteria with specified intervals. These scales actually introduce bias and error into performance ratings due to their subjectivity. They are very subject to the 7 deadly sins of error. In contrast, behaviorally anchored rating scales are much better at assessing performance because they have clearly defined scale points containing examples of the specific behaviors. You basically associate each number on the scale with a particular behavior you want to identify. For example, a behaviorally anchored rating scale specifies exactly what it means to be a 1, a 3, or a 5 by matching each number with exact behaviors. It spreads behaviors across the whole scale, which adds to discriminant validity, and it helps with consistency when measuring both across people and across multiple raters. Other things to consider when creating valid and reliable performance appraisals are approaches to management. The first one is a results-based or metrics approach, which uses management by objectives. Basically, individuals and managers set goals at the beginning of the year and then decide what behaviors specifically warrant appraisal. The behaviors or goals are specific and usually numerical targets during the evaluation period. At the end of the year, you get to see if the goal was met or not. The pros of management by objectives is that it provides clear behavioral benchmarks to employees. You know what the drivers of performance are and which behaviors will lead to appraisal in the assessment. It also applies goal setting and HR making performance specific, measurable, achievable, and participative. The cons to this approach is that it's really difficult to make comparisons across employees of different skill levels because the behaviors are not universally applicable. Many aspects of performance can also be beyond the control of an employee, such as the context or the environment that they're in. For example, you don't want to mistake reward of performance of the employee with a rapid surge in sales for Zoom due to high market demand during the pandemic. Additionally, not all aspects of performance are measured, like helping behaviors or extra role behaviors. And finally, feedback really might not help employees learn how to change their behaviors because it only tells them what's effective, not how it's effective. In terms of performance appraisal, it may work very well, but it's not particularly useful in driving performance management. The second approach is the comparative approach, which is used by lots of big firms. It uses a really simple ranking system. Managers will rank employees from best to worst, either overall or in reference to a particular attribute. It forces distribution of evaluation. This approach is used in big companies a lot, like GE and Procter & Gamble. They require that managers identify high performers, the top 10%, and low performers, the lowest 20%, and then give everybody else an average weight. This helps them figure out who to select out of the organization and who to fast track for leadership. Another way to do comparison is through paired comparison, where you systematically pair and compare employees. It's not an overall assessment, but a choice of A versus B. Is Mark or Fatima better at creating content? There are lots of reasons to use paired comparison. First, it's really good at differentiating individual performance. And it helps clarify key decision points like who to hire, who to fire, and who to promote. It's also really easy to use, relatively fair, and generally accepted by users. It also controls for non-controllables, like external factors in the environment that are the same across people. On the other hand, it can be quite controversial. it can be subjective. And although some systems use multiple raters, then it becomes complicated to resolve discrepancies. Second, it doesn't actually explain how to improve behaviors. Just because you were told you were lower in rank than someone else doesn't help you understand how to improve. And then it can create huge problems in terms of competition. Being constantly compared to other people can create rivalries or even a hostile work environment. Internal competition may be useful for some firms where individual sales mean money, like investment banks, but really can harm interdependent organizations that need a collaborative environment. Also, people try and game these systems by trying to get a leg up by picking or choosing tasks that seem easier so they appear to be better performing. Or everyone can organize to collectively do some quiet quitting to collude against the system so that everybody has worse performance. Some workers may also not want to perform at their highest to avoid angering everybody. Or the opposite would be the person who will sell their soul for the numbers, who makes everyone else look bad by boosting their own ratings dramatically, but forgets extra role behaviors that makes the organization function smoothly. This reminds us of equity theory. If you're not making the right comparisons, it can be really demotivating. Comparison is a dangerous thing to introduce without very specific metrics to ensure that the comparisons are valid and appropriate. In summary, performance management and performance appraisal are important to understand, and it's a really good place to apply motivation theory in human resources. In general, the best way to appraise people is linking specific behaviors to outcomes, being specific about those behaviors, and giving the feedback in a timely fashion. But performance appraisal is only part of the story. We want to think about an entire performance management system that uncouples the evaluation and the development of employees. Doing that can help the morale of the organization, maintain good manager and supervisor relationships, and help you attract and retain the best people. So next time someone asks you to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, stop and think and ask them, what are the specific behavioral measures that can ensure an objective appraisal and consistently measure across all individuals? See you next time.